Therapist perception.
Bachelorette. Welcome back to Reactivity TV, where we give our therapist perception of reality TV and just TV in general. And on this episode of Reactivity TV, we are giving our therapist take to week 3, episode 3 of season 27 of The Bachelor, with Zach Shallcross as our bachelor.
In this case, in this episode, Zach Shellcrush or Balzac.
I was so curious about who comes up with those names.
Yeah.
Is it a contestant, producers? I want to know.
Yeah, me too.
But I need to make an amendment. Actually, maybe I'll save it later for one of my things that I wanted to address. But I have to say, I know last week I referred to it as the boring Zach Shallcross. I'm quite enjoying this season.
I am too, much more than I thought that I would.
Yeah.
He's not giving me the ick as much as I thought that he would.
Yeah, well, the ick is definitely on my agenda for today. But what about you? What?
One thing that I wanted to talk about is the interaction between Bailey and Zach. So Bailey went home.
Balin,
Balin, the Daily Balin. Bailey went home, which was super surprising to me. And before he had sent her home, she went up to him. She was telling us that she had already felt a little distance from him since the first night, and that she was feeling really good about things. And then they hadn't really interacted much. So she was feeling a little disconnected. So she wanted to go and address that with him. So she did. And it seemed like she was looking for him to say, no, I'm not, I'm still there with you on the first night. I'm right there. I still feel like there's something here and this could go somewhere. But he didn't do that. And she was honest with him. She was upfront and said, I'm feeling like we're not getting there, which also was very interesting because one, you've talked to this guy once that you haven't, neither of you have actually given this thing a chance for anything to potentially grow.
Right.
So it seemed very early for somebody to get to that point of we're not getting there. Well, no, you're not getting anywhere because you talked to him one time.
Right.
So, and if there was that spark on that first night that you both were feeling, well, there's only so far that can go, especially if he's having all these other relationships and those are all really going really well, then it makes sense that didn't really take them anywhere else.
Yeah, I found that interaction so very interesting. I think I said this on week 1 of this season. I would have put money on the fact that Bailey, I was going to call her Balin, Bailey would have gotten the first impression rose. I thought she was going really far. So I was as surprised as she was, I think, that she got sent home. But you're right. It sounds like she was feeling insecure. She led with insecurity in that interaction with Zach, seeking a validation and affirmation, and instead kind of just opened it up for Zach to say, well, you're feeling that way. I'm feeling this way. Let's cut it right here. And I do wonder what would have happened if Bailey would have not said anything and tried to lead with more confidence or just engage more.
Right. Just gone into a regular conversation with him and felt things out that way rather than okay, yes, sometimes being upfront and honest is great. And sometimes feeling it out and actually just moving through things is how you get those answers.
Yeah, there wasn't enough data basically to support her concern, I don't think. But I was listening to a podcast on my way here, a Bachelor podcast, and the co-host of that show pointed out something that was really interesting, which is that I forget how many women were introduced to Zach after the final rose. But all but one have been eliminated. So Bailey, Christina, Brianna, Kat, and I think who's left is Brooklyn. But that is interesting because I was also kind of shocked that Christina Mendrell went home as well this week. But in some ways, he has known these women for like a couple of months, or has had a couple of months to kind of think about them, whereas these other relationships are newer. So maybe Zach did have enough information of feeling like, okay, these people have kind of like been in my orbit for 3 months, and yet I'm feeling stronger connections with these women that I just met a couple of weeks ago.
That is really interesting. And I wonder if it has that same kind of effect that we were talking about on a different episode of Wishing You Well, where I think it was on, when we were talking about dating, we were talking about dating apps and the difference between like seeing somebody's picture and like making up this idea in your head of what they might be like, and then actually meeting them, and then kind of like matching the two or not matching the two, and then learning about this person that is actually in front of you. Like maybe he met these people that night and then made up this idea in his head of like, oh, what this person's going to be like. And then he actually met them and he's like totally let down.
Yeah. Right. Well, and if you think about, I mean, I'm trying to remember like their gimmick on stage. It's possible that the way that the women represented themselves isn't consistent with how they are showing up now. And that also, like, again, for Zach, creates some dissonance. And so, yeah, it's really, really interesting. And I was glad that they pointed that out because I don't think I would have made that connection. Yeah. So are you, so part of it is, so we're saying regarding Bailey, that she could have just hung back and kind of collected more information, basically, or maybe put herself out there a little bit more to engage with him and try to build a connection, rather than kind of tap out. But she went to him for validation rather than kind of like taking charge on her own end,
and actually exploring the relationship. Yeah. What did you notice this week?
Well, I think Zach told the women and the audience about 27 times that he is looking for his best friend. Like that is his brand. I'm just trying to find my best friend. And I guess it's so prominent as a theme in a way I've never heard before. And even Christina Mendrell, again, God, I'm giving you so much. Get it, girl.
She's the Genevieve.
But even as she was leaving, she said, I hope you find your best friend. Like it is so much a part of the way that they are now framing what he's looking for. And I guess I was just kind of thinking about just that approach in terms of dating for marriage. And I don't know, I guess like from your take as a marriage and family therapist, you work with a lot of couples or people in relationships, and like, where do you find like the friendship within a romantic relationship sits?
I mean, it is huge. So much of, especially in like doing work with couples where it's like easier to do rather than like with an individual and talking about the relationship. Like when you're in the room with a couple and they're having all of these conflicts, they're also not engaging as friends. And they've really oftentimes forgotten to uphold that friendship as much as they've forgotten to uphold, or like they're having difficulties upholding all these other parts of their relationship. But that actual friendship that like often we're talking about it being like a partnership where that could imply other things. That's a big foundation for a successful relationship, is to be a friend to your person. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think so too. Well, I was kind of reflecting on my own like personal experience, and I remember like relatively, I mean, I've shared on Wishing You Well. My husband and I have been together for 15 years. And I remember relatively recently, like I'd say like maybe half the time that we've been together, he said something kind of casually like, well, you're my best friend. And I was like, I am? And then he was like, well, of course you are. Like, who else would be? And then I was like, well, I guess you're my best friend too.
That's so cute.
But I was kind of thinking about that kind of as in terms of like maybe what Zach is actually saying is that's where I'm confused is like, is he looking for like, what does that mean to him? Is that like, he wants someone who has shared interests. He wants someone, I think what you're saying about friendship too, is like, there's a shared like there. Like there's an opting in when we on Wishing You Well, when we talked about adult friendships, like what makes them so hard is that we have to opt into them. And so maybe there's that element too, or maybe someone to have fun with or to do things with. And so like, there's a part of me that wishes Zach would be a little bit more explicit on like exact and on like actually what that means. Cause I feel like putting a blanket over, I'm just looking for my best friend, like isn't actually giving a lot of information to the people that he's dating about what his expectations are and his view of what a best friend is might not be consistent.
Okay, wait. So talk a little bit about this, like what could get lost in him emphasizing that he wants a friendship, a best friendship, and also like the romantic factor.
Yeah, well, I think romance is what it differentiates a platonic relationship from a romantic one. And if there has to be like a nice balance between compatibility, i.e. friendship, and chemistry, and more of that romantic sexual attraction. And so if it's just kind of thinking about like, who do I get along with, then he might miss that other piece. And for him, I don't know how important that is. And like, and for all of us that can vary in terms of like the value or the weight that is placed. And clearly he's making out all over the place. So I'm going to make an assumption that that's meaningful to him. But yeah, I think that would be the part that I get concerned is missing, is that they leave and they're like, oh, do we have a romantic connection here?
Yeah. What are some other things that you saw?
Well, I have two more. One, going back to Christina, she was having a hard time. And the other women in the house were having an equally hard time dealing with her.
With her hard time.
And I was just kind of observing that Christina was in a position of completely oversharing, whether it was oversharing about the details of her one-on-one, and they were kind of mocking her for that. And just kind of talking about herself in general. And it was really rubbing people the wrong way. And in life, outside of Bachelor Mansion, like I imagine we've all encountered someone who overshares or like monopolizes a conversation or makes it about them, like is so self-centered. And it's really challenging to deal with, and it can really grate on your nerves and also cause people to not want to spend time with you. And so I was kind of thinking about that and kind of thinking about ways that we watched them deal with an oversharer. And one was kind of like just directly confronting it. I think Brooke or Brooklyn like had said like, enough already. And this is the second or third time I think we've seen her put down some boundaries, whether it's removing herself from a situation or in this case.
Brooklyn has done that a lot.
Yeah. She told her like in not as nice of words to like, just stop, be quiet. So we saw that happen. We also saw Charity get up and leave when she was getting annoyed. We also saw people kind of talking shit behind her back. That is a way to kind of deal with an oversharer. But Christina didn't really seem interested in the feedback and didn't really seem interested in applying the feedback or understanding like how her actions were impacting the house, the group.
Yeah, she was not interested in, well, she even said like she wasn't interested in making friends. Mm-hmm. Like she's there for Zach. Mm-hmm. But there's a difference between not interested in making friends and being aware enough of yourself to consider other people. Mm-hmm. Like you don't have to be best friends with them, but you also need to have some sort of self-awareness to recognize when people are hurt by something that you're saying or bothered or annoyed.
Mm-hmm. Right. Just like having some sort of like regard or respect for people that you're like sharing a space with. It's really hard though. I was thinking about, I have an oversharer in my life and I've tried the direct communication route and it doesn't really work. And so now I'm on the like disengagement route, which in some ways feels a bit better, but it's avoidance. But it is really tough when you're dealing with someone that doesn't really have a lot of self-awareness or maybe doesn't understand like how to filter themselves properly.
Well, and if you're dealing with it on a more regular basis outside of Bachelor Mansion, then that avoidance and disengagement and then the directness, it might come in like cycles because it's somebody that's actually just in your life rather than being in the mansion where disengaging, well, okay, I'm like, I don't have to ever see this person again, hopefully, you know, where in your life and in our lives where that happens, it's just a way to give yourself the boundaries that you need from somebody and the time away before you like have the energy and the patience to go back in.
Yeah, no, that's really true. The luxury of living in the mansion with those bunk beds. So yeah, that was one of the other things that I saw. And then of course, the second week in a row, I'm noting something that happened in the credits.
The credits are always the best.
Bloopers. Usually they're reserved for bloopers, but the last 2 weeks have been so fascinating. I've really appreciated the content of the conversation. Last week they were talking about like bodily functions, and this week they got into a conversation about the ick, and basically they were saying the ick is like when someone does something, and they were kind of saying it usually happens like within a first impression that is just like kind of an immediate turn off, like immediate no. And there's like no coming back from it. And I was thinking about what I was alluding to at the beginning, my amended opinion about the season is that, you know, when we knew Zach was announced as the Bachelor, I was like, immediately no, Zach gives me the ick. I just cannot, like, ew, no. Ew. And I think I had said to you, like, there is no way that I'm coming back from this opinion, like, gross.
And
the ick has lifted a little bit.
A little.
Do I can I acknowledge that he's just an objectively kind of attractive person? Yes. I could not. Catherine still has the ick, you know? And so that tells me that, like, okay, so there's some movement here. And I know a couple of weeks ago we were talking about first impressions, and it was just having me think about that sometimes like a first impression can read us so wrong or read a situation so wrong. And maybe we shouldn't be so quick to believe a first impression. I think someone was saying, like in the credits, like, depending on the way someone opens the door for me, like I could be out. And it's like, okay, come on.
It's extreme.
That's extreme.
No, I totally agree. I think the ick and like getting that initial just like turn off can be informative, but it doesn't have to be all defining. You know, you don't have to make your entire idea of somebody off of just that. And yeah, because you're right, that it's just a first impression. And like, there's so much more to somebody than their first impression. And I think that the thing about like the trend of the ick is that it's supposed to do that. Like, it's supposed to be like, oh my God, I noticed this one, like I noticed that this person chews with their mouth open and now I can't see past it. And like every time I see them, they don't have to be eating, but like that's all I can hear and that's all I can see from them is that they do that. And so you hyper focus on this one fault of theirs, this one like flaw that you see, and rather than trying to look at anything else that you might like. And so I don't think that like leaning into the ick is something that is helpful for anybody.
Right. Yeah. I don't think so too. Think so either. And I don't totally understand why it's such a thing right now, like such a trend. But I almost think I have to think about it more, but I think it's a way that it puts people into a camp of like all or nothing. And also there must be something around kind of like avoidance, like that's coming up that I like just can't conceptualize right now, but you can move beyond the ick, I guess is my point, if you let yourself.
Perfect.
Well, that's all we have for this week's episode of Reactivity TV, but next week we'll be back with more. And upcoming, we're going to be talking about other shows like You, Succession, and of course, The Bachelor.
Outer Banks.
Outer Banks coming soon.
I'm rewatching it now to get it.
Me too. I have 2 more episodes to go till I'm there. Yes. So stay tuned to Reactivity TV and let us know in the comments what other shows we should be watching. Bye.